What is going on, everyone, and welcome to r/ProRevenge. Now, imagine yourself in this position. Your mum has been battling cancer for 6 months and has sadly passed away. Your landlord, though, does not care one bit and actually mocks the death of your mother to your face, saying, "I don't care, I just want my money," showing you no compassion whatsoever. What would you do in that situation? Well, that is exactly what happens in today's first story. Mock my mother's death, I'll bankrupt you. My now ex-wife Kate and I moved to an apartment in 2010. The house as a whole was a renovated townhouse split between two sides, with 2 apartments on the bottom and 2 apartments upstairs. I wasn't the biggest fan of the apartment, as it was a much older building than I'd ever lived in, but I quickly adjusted to the wood creaking throughout the night. On the initial walkthrough, we noticed that the only problem was that there was a dip in the bathroom ceiling. The landlord, Jay, promised he would get it fixed ASAP. 1 year to the day since moving in, there was a loud crash at 4 AM. The bathroom ceiling had collapsed and there was tiling and wood all over the floor and in the bathtub. Now, Kate was typically the aggressive one, while I was more passive and laid back, and she kept calling Jay throughout the next day. When she got in touch with him at around 9 PM, she explained what happened and insisted that it be fixed immediately. He rebuffed with him yelling that his girlfriend was a lawyer and he didn't need to do anything. Now, this is where I got mad. I went outside and called him myself. I feigned a relaxed demeanor, and at first he began trying to talk to me as a bro and kept saying, "Dude, I'm gonna get someone out there, but it's gonna take a few weeks." When he couldn't sway me that way, he began yelling about his girlfriend and her knowing the law. What he was unaware of was that I had read the tenant laws in my state, and so as he tried to lie, I waited until he was finished and I recited the law, stating that if an apartment was considered uninhabitable, then the landlord needed to pay for the tenant to stay in a place until it was resolved. He tried to say that our upstairs neighbour, Phil, was the super, but he wasn't sure if he could get down there that night. He put me on hold, then came back a few minutes later and said that Phil and his girlfriend were out of state. I rang Phil's doorbell and asked, with Jay on the speakerphone, if he was assigned as super. He laughed and said no. Dejected, he said he would have people out there the next day. Previously, he said they were busy for at least 3 weeks. There's more to this incident, but it led to 2 conclusions. 1, if you're going to lie, then there has to be a consistency in your lie, and make sure that the people you lie to don't communicate with each other. And 2, this is where a feud started between me and my Kate versus him and his mother. She was the original landlord and gave the house to him so he could begin to profit. So fast forward to a year later, Jay stopped coming to the house and his mum began doing the pickups. Around this time, my ex and I had been laid off and we were working with Social Security for food, health and housing insurance. We were approved of all 3 in April, but we would not get the check until May. When our typical check wasn't in the landlord's mailbox, he immediately gave us a summons, saying that he was taking us to court for eviction. The day we went to court, he had no lawyer, and going before the judge, here's the summation. The judge said, "Does the defense have a means to pay within 90 days of non-payments?" We say, "Yes, Judge." We then hand over paperwork showing that our landlord will be paid for April and May. The judge said, "I see no problem. They are not breaking any laws. Why are we here?" And then Jay came back with this, "Well, Your Honor, they have been bullying." Then the judge interrupted, "I don't care. Unless they are breaking a law, this case is dismissed." Suffice to say, Jay and his mother were not happy. Around this time in my life, things were tumultuous. My mother, who had been battling lung cancer, succumbed to it in June. This happened at roughly the same time his mum came knocking looking for payments. I explained that I would leave it in the mailbox when we got back from the funeral home and to please just respect my right to mourn. She took her fingers and began rubbing them together, pretending to play the smallest violin. I will never forget what she said next. "Oh, my mummy just died. Woe is me. She probably had it coming. I don't care if your entire family is dead. I want my money." She smiled smugly, proud with what she had just said. I saw red and my heart jumped into my throat. I went, grabbed the check and handed it to her in absolute shock that anyone would say something so effed up. She had finally managed to push a button that very few people I've known throughout my life have seen. I went into rage mode, but not in the way you would expect. Now for the revenge. We were always told by the landlord that if a health inspector came by to not open the door. I waited until August, since that was when the lease was going to run run out and we knew they would not extend a renewal. I walked up the block to town hall to ask for a health inspection of our property. It was scheduled for several days later. Now, it's important to note several things. First of all, I was friends with all of the tenants. Phil had moved out with his fiancée, but the new tenant was Danny upstairs on our side. Tom and Hannah were on the other side of the downstairs floor and they had moved out, and Jay was still looking for new tenants. The only one who wanted to stay out of all of this was Rose on the upper right apartments. 2, I had gotten a key so I could let the inspector into Danny's apartment, and I knew that I could use the back staircase on the right side to let him into Tom's, now vacant apartments. And 3, I also knew that Danny was moving out in September along with Kate and myself. The inspector came in and it was glorious. He checked the exterior of the house first, noting that wires were exposed, there was an old empty dryer along with other old clutter in the backyard. I brought him inside the shed entrance and, as I was counting on, he noticed that the last inspection dated back to 1994, 18 years ago. This meant that for each year he did not have an inspection, there would be appropriate fines. For our apartment, we had black mold growing in our bathroom and the bubble in the ceiling had begun to grow to problematic proportions. Upstairs, Danny's apartment was suffering from leaks in the ceiling, and it looked like her bathroom ceiling was also on the brink of collapsing. We then went to the basement. The boiler was on the verge of exploding. There was flammable items along with gasoline and a pack of matches sitting right beside it. 2 things that I did not know were, 1, the fire door that separated the 2 sides did not close all the way, rendering it moot, and on the right basement side there was a toilet. A toilet that had blown up. It had coated the surrounding walls and the leakage prevented us going up to the floor via the right side. The entire time the inspector was photographing and writing constantly. We stepped outside and he said he needed to come back. When I asked why, he said he had run out of space to write down all of the infractions. He had filled the front and had written an entire page on the back portion. I kindly and coyly asked, well, how much will it cost right now? He scratched his head and said, around 20 to 30k from what I can see, but it's probably going to be higher as this house was never licensed to be split into apartments. I thanked him and he was going to come back with the county inspector. So we moved out, but I got the rundown from Rose. Because the landlord was the current owner, he owed all current fines, and no one new could move into the empty apartments until everything was up to code. Because 3 out of 4 were vacant, he was losing $4,500 in potential rent. He handed the property back to his mother and had to claim for bankruptcy. Now, here's the other thing. Every time an old tenant left and a new one was coming in, an inspection was supposed to be done. Now that all of the financial burden fell on her, they looked into the records and she was fined for each time she had broken that rule, $750 per. By the end of the year, Rose had moved out, so the place was hemorrhaging money. I sat back, proud of what I had done, and left it be. No, F that, I was not close to done yet. At this point, I felt like I had destroyed Jay, but my real target had always been his mum. I learned that she had about 8 properties throughout 3 towns in my county. I went to each one, spoke to the tenants and said I was a concerned tenant from another property and asked if they had any problems with their apartments. Every person I asked described the apartment in very poor to intolerable levels and that the mum was effectively a slumlord. She would ignore problems unless someone turned to litigations, she was threatened that they would summon the inspector, or more often than not, the people would move out, she'd refuse their deposits and sink those into repairs. People rarely fought back because she knew that the occupants were of upper, lower class minorities. So, being the concerned person I was, I went to the inspector of the other 2 towns and asked for an inspection to be done, with at least 1, if not more, of the current tenants waiting the inspector when they came. It turns out that she faced pretty much the same infractions on every apartment she owned. It turned out she actually had 12 apartments, but I initially only knew about the ones that fell within my county. The remaining properties in the next county over were given a heads up for a surprise inspection. From what I can tell, Jay's mum had been in the landlord business for about 35 to 40 years. That collapsed quickly. Since we moved literally 1 block down the road from our old one, I got to see Jay lose his primary source of income and have to claim bankruptcy, but I also saw that his mother was also trying desperately to find a buyer for all of the apartments so she could pay off the fines. I learned 2 years later that she too had to file for bankruptcy. Jay and his mother camped out in front of our next apartment for 2 days in October of 2013 before she filed for bankruptcy. I'm guessing to scream at me and or Kate, so I called the cops and said that there were strange people standing in a no parking zone, and they kept looking up at the second floor. A cruiser swung by and told them to leave. I know I should have used the 2 months I spent monitoring everything to find a new job, but this was the one and only time I wanted to cripple a person where they hurt the most, their wallets. I think I got my point across. None of this would have happened if you had just frickin' fixed the ceiling before it collapsed, Jay. Wow, I mean, honestly, if someone says that your mum deserved to die, then I don't care, you can do anything to that person, you know, within legal bounds, of course. But how can you actually say something like that? It's just like, what sort of a person do you have to be to think of saying something so horrible and just, it's just like, how do you even fathom generating that sentence in your head and thinking, you know what, yeah, I'm actually going to say these words? It's just, what a terrible person. You know, the one thing I'm actually quite disappointed in you, OP, for not doing is, when they were sitting outside your house camping without an apartment for themselves, you should have gone outside when the police arrived and just, you know, done a little violin yourself. A little violin saying, you know, how does this feel? How does this feel? You deserve to be out here camping. Because that would have been the top tier of karma right there. But I mean, let's be honest, what you did was pretty freaking amazing. You know, losing them all of their 12 properties, probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, right? If they've got 12 properties that they own and they're having to pay fines up to what, 50,000, 30,000 on each one, that's a lot of money. And yeah, you know what? They're just horrible people and they deserve to pay the fines. So OP, well done. Now moving on to our next story. Live in a rental for over a year without paying rent? Good luck in jail. This has all been finalized, so I decided to post it. For obvious reasons, I did not want to post it while it was ongoing. Last summer, I bought a house trailer and decided to rent it out. It needed some work, so I posted 2 months free rent for putting carpet down in the living room, hooking up the hot water heater, and putting in a toilet. I got a nice couple with a newborn willing to do it. Great. No lease, month to month, no security deposits, and the rent was $450 a month. So they did the work, so I didn't ask for rent for 2 months. Everything was fine. Side note, there are a few little state laws that come into play here. If you don't pay rent for 3 consecutive months, you are considered a squatter, which means the landlord doesn't have to fix the property and can actually padlock it and deny you entry. If you're on house arrest and get formally evicted, you could be violated for it. Also, you can be formally evicted even if you've already moved out, so the landlord can get rent due. As well, even though there are eviction bans, if it happened before the ban, then it can still go through, plus a few other conditions that still allow someone to be evicted. It's up to the judge, really. Fast forward 5 months and still no rent money. Yes, they had a newborn and they were young and didn't have a lot of money, but the husband can spend $1,500 on a new engine for his project car. They can afford to go out to eat and spend money on electronics, but no rent. So, after that 3rd month, I did nothing. The weather was turning cold. I didn't put in the furnace like I promised, and if they hadn't had a newborn, I would have padlocked the house. They were bragging about their tax refund. I gave them a shot to catch up, and they basically said that they knew their rights and were in a rent strike. Illegally, I might add, you will see later. COVID happened. The husband got laid off, so I gave them a break. When he went back to work, I asked for rent back again and was told to F off. I finally had enough. I told them they had 14 days to get out or I was doing a formal eviction, and seeing that he was on house arrest, he knew what that meant. I honestly was trying to keep him from having to go back to jail and keep an eviction off of their record. I was trying to be nice and civil. So they left and I cut my losses until I checked the property. Everything they put in, they removed. Everything they got for free rent was gone. I was fuming and filed for a formal eviction. It didn't go as they hoped. They said I didn't provide heat, so they went on a rent strike. Only they didn't file that with the courts or hold the money aside. They just thought they could stop paying rent. What they put into the trailer was less than the rent. The judge agreed with me that seeing they took everything, I was due those 2 months rent, and the biggest. Next, he started slamming my character, so I said, well, you didn't tell me you were going to be going on house arrest when you rented the property. Before then, the judge looked bored, but he perked up. He asked them if that was true. They responded that it was, and he was ready to make his ruling. I received 15 months back rent at $450 a month and $2,000 in damages, because the way they removed the stuff, they damaged a lot of things. As for him, the judge said he had no choice but to turn the eviction over to his parole officer. Fast forward to this month. His house arrest was violated and he was arrested. They actually had the nerve to ask me to speak on his behalf. I didn't. The ruling was that his remaining 6 months are now being spent in jail. They have a bad eviction on their record and they owe me money. Moral of the story, know the law before you play the game. And there we have two very different stories about renting from very different perspectives. The first one from the perspective of the renters with horrible landlords who treated them horribly and then said that your mum deserved to die. Wow. The second we have from the perspective of the renter who had horrible tenants who refused to pay him and also just sat there for free for a number of months, also had been on house arrest. Yeah, that's pretty crazy stuff. It just shows that you can get good landlords, you can get good renters or tenants, but you can also get bad of the same, if you know what I mean. So yeah, it just depends on the people, I guess, really. Overall though, two very good ProRevenge stories, and I really hope you enjoyed them. That is going to do it for this video. If you do want more ProRevenge videos right away, then I've got a whole playlist right here. This is my most popular ProRevenge videos of all time. So if you click this one, the first one is literally the most popular of all time on my channel, so you know it's going to be a good one. Also, hit this button here, make sure you are subscribed to my channel for daily Reddit content that you just don't want to miss.